All right, so this is Herb Robert, Geranium robertianum. Kind of a silly name for a plant. Usually when plants are named after people, they're usually botanists or herbalists. You'll find maybe Robert was a herbalist in Queen Victoria's court or some strange thing like that. Back in those days, almost everything was done by men, so usually when plants are named after people, they're named after men because those times were uh, very male dominated, you might say. Although sometimes beautiful little plants are named after women, like Bouncing Bet. I don't know who Bet is, but you'll get sometimes plants with very beautiful flowers that often women were attracted to being named after women as well. But anyway, Herb Robert is not a native plant. We do have a couple of native geranium species, but this is one that was imported, planted in gardens. It does really well in shady areas. It was planted both as an ornamental and as a medicine because it was used as a lot as a medicine in Europe. And it is an interesting plant in that it goes into flower pretty early, usually sometime in early May, and it's one of the longest flowering plants. It tends to continue to get taller and taller and taller and branch and flower. And in a good year, it can flower until mid-October. So probably the longest flowering period of any plant that I know. Now, the way this plant grows is similar to the celandine in that you can't really see it here but it comes up as a single stalk and then it branches. And then each of these stalks will produce additional stalks that branch, and it gets taller and taller and taller. So like the celandine, we don't harvest this one. This is one of the unusual plants that we don't harvest when it first starts to flower. We wait until the plant gets larger and we get multiple branchings. And like the celandine, you find one of those good stalks, and from each plant, you make sure it's a plant that has more than one of those stalks. You harvest it right at the first branching. Now, right now, that doesn't look like very much, but in a few weeks, this will have grown. It'll probably have branched 2 or 3 more times, and it will be a significant portion of plant material. So that's typically the way that we harvest it. And that means waiting longer. Usually I don't harvest this plant till mid to late June, when the plant, by that time, instead of having its first set of branchings like it does now, it'll be on its second or third set of branching, which means that when I cut at the base of one of those branching, the amount of plant I'm getting is a lot more significant, which makes it much, much easier to harvest. Now, if you're just harvesting a tiny little amount for personal use, you could do it now because you don't need to harvest a lot of it. But when I'm harvesting it and making liters of tincture, I have to harvest a lot more, and I want to wait until the plant is significantly larger so that I can harvest from less plants, and it also just makes it easier, in terms of the amount of time involved. Now, this one is very, very succulent, and it really isn't necessary to get rid of much stalk at all. Usually, what I'll do is I'll cut it just below the first branching, and then the next major stalk, there'll be another small section of 2 or 3 inches of main stalk before it branches again, and I might just remove that amount. But it really isn't necessary to remove a lot of stalk at all. You don't have to technically remove any of the stalk because the stalk is very succulent and very close in potency to the potency of the leaves. The plant is traditionally, it was primarily used topically, and it's used topically. Like the geraniums are fairly astringent plants, And they're often used topically as styptics, meaning to stop bleeding or oozing from a wound. So you get a wound, initially it bleeds for a while, then your body starts to set up a scab. It forms fibers that catch blood vessels and catch blood cells and starts to form a scab. But initially it might stop the blood cells from coming through, so it's not bleeding anymore, but you will get blood plasma still seeping through until the wound is completely sealed off. So it's not uncommon for a wound to ooze like a clear liquid for a period of time after the bleeding stops. If you apply it either fresh or dried topically during that time, it will stop the bleeding or oozing from the wound. And it also helps to, begin the initial process of healing, because it's a very good vulnerary. It's a very good wound healing herb. So again, like a lot of herbs that are used for that purpose, it is an herb that can be used for any kind of rashes, cuts, scrapes. It's not as penetrating, so that we don't use it as much for deep tissue injuries. For bruising, okay, but for sprains and strains and things that are deeper, it's not as effective. It's used more for surface things or things relatively close to the surface. Very good for blood vessel issues like varicose veins and spider veins, hemorrhoids, and things like that. And then again, as is typical, anything that can be beneficial to heal or reduce inflammation of the skin also benefits the mucous membranes in the mouth, throat, and digestive tract. So again, it can be used for mouth ulcers, gingivitis, other types of things like that. You could apply it too after getting dental work done, and it will not only speed up the healing and reduce inflammation, but it will stop bleeding in the mouth that comes after major dental work, like if you have a tooth pulled or something like that, or if your gums are bleeding after a particularly vigorous cleaning of your teeth. It's really good for that, and it's good for ulcers and inflammation, colitis, gastritis, inflammatory conditions further down in the digestive tract. It is also used for internally for blood vessel problems as well. And that can be in things like internal hemorrhaging, although honestly, if someone has got internal hemorrhaging, they should go to the hospital because it could be something very serious. But you could use it for something like nosebleeds or something like that, taken internally. It's one of the qualities of this herb, though, is that it significantly loses its potency when it's dried. So really, unless you're poulticing it fresh on a wound, and if you're out in the woods, you can simply take some of it, chew it up, plaster it on, because you need to break it up. You could rub it or something, that would work, but I find chewing works best. And most plants are antimicrobial enough when they're in concentrated form like that. You don't have to worry about any bacteria from your mouth causing an infection. That's unlikely to happen anyway, because the bacteria in your mouth is the bacteria your body is used to. So you're not likely to get an infection from your own bacteria on a wound, although it could happen in some very rare instances. But even when my kids were small, we would go hiking in the woods. If they fell and scraped their knee, I would just grab some plantain or heal all or Herb Robert or something like that, chew it up and plaster it on them, and they never got an infection from that, because these plants are very antimicrobial when they're super concentrated like that. And some of them are very antimicrobial even when they're used in diluted form. But this herb is very antimicrobial, so when you apply it to wounds, it will help prevent infections as well. It is also used to improve circulation throughout the body. It's detoxifying, and it's especially good for lymphatic conditions. So swollen lymph nodes, edema, water retention, and toxicity in the lymphatic system. Its action on reducing toxins from the body is primarily through the lymphatic and urinary tract, although it does have a mild action on the liver. The other thing about it being used fresh is that it needs to be used very fresh. If you're harvesting it fresh to make a tincture from it, which is the only way you're going to be able to keep it for a period of time and use it later on, it's very important that it gets chopped up and processed into a tincture as quickly as possible, ideally within an hour or less. And the reason for that is it has this essential oil, but it doesn't have a lot of it. And if it's lying around for too long before you process it, it will lose most of its essential oil. You'll see it when you first harvest it. It's got this skunky smell, but within a couple of hours, that smell disappears. It's not the most pleasant smelling essential oil, but the essential oil content is important for maximum potency of the plant. So ideally, you want to use it fresh, and it needs to be processed into a tincture within an hour, if possible. Sometimes with herbs like that, if I had to travel some distance, I'll actually process it on site. I'll bring my jars, I'll bring my menstruum, my mixture of water, alcohol, and glycerin, and I'll bring a little portable table and cutting board, and I'll process it right there so I get it really, really fresh. But I harvest so many herbs right around where we live, and I could get enough herb Robert around here so I don't have to do that. Another thing, a thing that it has a history of being used for is it was used as a fresh poultice. It's used topically for skin cancer, for which it is apparently very effective. Trying to think of internally. It has a mild calming effect on the nervous system, although it's not used as much for that purpose. Now, one of the things about the geraniums is they tend to be very astringent. Not as astringent as the white pine that we talked about earlier, but they tend to be very astringent, which is one of the reasons why they're used a lot for styptics, to stop bleeding, to stop hemorrhaging. And because of that, whenever you get herbs that are verging into what I would call, in this case, a medium potency astringent, it again, you always have that challenge that it can be irritating to the gut. And also, when you astringe the gut in the stomach and in the duodenum, one of the things that, just as it prevents or reduces oozing or bleeding from wounds, that astringent quality reduces secretions. And when those secretions in our digestive tract, in our stomach and our duodenum, are really important because they contain digestive enzymes that we need for digesting our food. So if you over astringe the digestive tract, it reduces the efficiency of digestion, and you don't want to do that. So for that reason, you have to be careful using it in quantity. We generally I don't recommend using more than 20% in a formula, and that's not due to toxicity. That's due to its astringent qualities. And of course, you wouldn't want to combine it with another strongly astringent herb unless you were specifically doing that to stop hemorrhaging of some kind. Okay, so that is the other thing is you wouldn't want to, nursing women wouldn't want to use it because those astringent herbs can actually reduce milk production. So it's contraindicated in nursing women for that reason. Other than that, it doesn't have any particular toxicity. Just gotta watch the level of astringency of the plant.